The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us on the East Coast and your beginning of your day with us on the West Coast. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Megan Montgomery with NCBFAA, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that, as always, all attendees are in listen-only mode. However, you can submit any questions at any time that you have by typing them into the webinar toolbar. As many questions will be answered as time permits. I'm excited to welcome John Kent of Kent & O'Connor, our legislative representative, and Charles Riley of John A. Steer Company, our legislative committee chair, to present today the potential path forward for trade in a Trump presidency. With that, please let me turn this over to Charles. Thank you, Charles, for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for attending. The reason for the webinar is that the NCBFA decided that with the President-elect Trump's rhetoric on trade, it was quite alarming to many of us in the industry. There was some little comments out there that would have a profound impact on our industry going forward if acted upon. So we thought it would be good to get some information out to our attendees so that you can start planning on how this might affect your business. So with that, I'd like to turn that over to John Kent, our legislative counsel, who has 6 years on the Hill and over 36 years of lobbying on the Hill. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. You know, I don't know what those 36 years have taught me, but I have gone through this whole phenomenon quite a number of times as we move from one president to a different president. And it's always somewhat different, and I've seen the same phenomenon where everybody's face is pressed against the window. They don't get information as fast as they'd like, and everybody's sort of in a quandary as to what things will look like as you go down the road. I can't say that right now I know anything for sure. I just, like you, keep an eye on things, know a few of the people involved in the transition, but I think the best source is usually coming out of the media. But here's sort of my what I'm taking from all of the election results. First of all, let me just also add that I was on Capitol Hill a day and a half after Election Day, and with the trade people, and they were both surprised and unable to predict in any way at all what was to come. They just disclaimed any responsibility for results now or in the future. So having said that, let me just cover the first slide that we've got for you. Covers our congressional elections, because I think I'd like to get that out of the way. Things didn't change a lot in the Congress. You can see that Republicans lost 2 seats and Democrats will, in the end, gain 2 seats. It's 51-48 right now, but there's a runoff election in Louisiana, and I'm told by people from Louisiana that it'll be the Republican that wins that race in the runoff. These are our PAC results. And everything was very, very positive. We only lost 1 race, and that was Boustany's race. We put Boustany was running for U.S. Senate. He'd left the House. He'd been a fearless advocate for a number of trade issues, most particularly drawback, and had really been a stalwart for us for several years. So we supported him in his run in Louisiana, but he failed to finish in the top 2 and therefore didn't make the runoff. The rest of the people that we supported won. I've only got a smattering of those winners before you here on this slide. I just think those are the key players in terms of mostly trade, some infrastructure rebuilding, some homeland security, and the very last one, Nydia Velasquez represents small business. She's the ranking member of small business, and we'll return to that. In the House, not too many changes. 8 Republicans failed or the Republican Party failed to hold on to 8 seats, and Democratic Party picked up 6, but they were way behind. Democrats were way behind before, and they're not much further ahead now. So it's a situation that's pretty much status quo. The bulk of changes in the House were 45 retirements and members of the House looking for other offices. There were only 8 members defeated, which is generally the par for the course. 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats lost in the general election. So I think from a committee standpoint, things pretty much stay the same. You'll see the Senate Finance Committee, which is our primary committee in the Senate for trade legislation, and these are the members of that committee. One member of the Republican side retired, Dan Coates, so there'll be an opening there. It's not a committee people leave voluntarily, although through retirement Dan Coates left. And Charles Schumer may leave that committee. Chuck Schumer may leave that committee because he's now going to be the minority leader of the Senate, and generally they leave committee work behind. So we may have an opening on the Democratic side, but that's really minor when you look at the vast number of people on the committee. Let me move on to the House Ways and Means Committee, Subcommittee on Trade. I've noted that Kevin Brady is the chairman of the full committee. Kevin Brady is a stalwart on trade and has stood out in terms of his support of TPP and his intent to get the customs bill passed from last year. There too, not too many changes. Charles Rangel retired on the Democratic side. Todd Young ran for the Senate from Indiana and won. He's now a senator. And Charles Boustany ran for the Senate, and as I said before, lost. But you can see there isn't a lot of change there. The leadership will fall to Brady, who has a strong relationship with the Speaker. The Speaker preceded him as the chairman of the full committee. And Dave Reichert of Washington has been a good subcommittee chairman thus far. I think it's important to note that the Congress is a counterbalance to what the administration may do in trade. Question remains how successful. TPP, as you may have heard today from a tweet or from a video that's been released from the president-elect, was the TPP will be essentially dumped, and they won't proceed further with it. TTIP is the European version of that, and I haven't heard too much about what the administration's intent was with respect to TTIP, but the Europeans have put that on hold and they're not negotiating any further with the Obama administration negotiators. But TPP has been something that the current president, Barack Obama, has badly wanted, talked about doing during the lame duck, but I think the writing was on the wall when both the candidates for president opposed it, and even more so, I think the door was absolutely closed today with the announcement that he was going to serve notice that they weren't moving forward with it. The U.S. has signed the treaty, but is not going to move forward in terms of having it adopted or implemented by the Congress. Mexico was another target, and you hear some signs from the Mexican president that he's willing to do some talking about current agreements, but certainly Mexico has been in the crosshairs. Other free trade agreements pending, I don't foresee. I don't see anything new coming down the road. The president-elect has said that he doesn't believe in multilateral trade agreements, that he believes in bilateral or two-party trade agreements. China has been also in the crosshairs during the election, and I think the interesting part, of course, with China is that China has been our benefactor insofar as loans. We owe them a lot of money. They are a primary trading partner, and how do you sort of say to your bank that you're going to do them harm? So that remains to be seen how China is dealt with. The president-elect has also talked about punitive tariffs or unfair trade practices, which has yet to be defined. And then finally, he's talked about getting out of NAFTA. That would have substantial consequences to our brokers and forwarders who do business with cross-border business with both countries. So the question remains, can we withdraw from NAFTA? Is it possible? Is it legal? Article 2205 of the NAFTA agreement says that with a notice of 6 months from any signatory to the NAFTA agreement, you can have one of those countries withdraw. Section 125 of the Trade Act of '74 provides broad authority to withdraw from a trade agreement and or increase tariffs. It seems likely that the president can do so, and the question remains as to whether it can be unilateral. It appears that it could be unilateral. You could certainly expect to see some litigation involved in this, but I think in the end you'll find that unilateral decision by the president would be sufficient. Of course, then that requires Congress to revise all the implementing legislation that may exist that might be in play. So far, the administration has appointed or has employed 3 people of some consequence in the whole business of creating trade policy. Steve Bannon is the guy that has created so much controversy, that was named to the chief White House as the chief White House strategist. He's been a sort of a very strong advocate against multilateral trade agreements and the like. Dan D'Amico is a previous or is a current executive with a steel company, and as many of you know, the steel companies have been very engaged for years in a sort of protectionist effort for their own industry. I see the signs of Dan D'Amico as the USTR transition team leader as a substantially negative factor in terms of expanding our negotiations through USTR or even maintaining status quo. The flip side of all of this is the appointment recently of Rolf Lundberg, who works at the U.S. Chamber, and he's in working transition for trade reform. Rolf and the U.S. Chamber have been advocates of a much freer, more open trade policy, and so the question sort of outstanding is whether Rolf will be a counterbalance to any of these sort of more protectionist attitudes that are going on around him and above him. I've known Rolf for many years, and he's worked with the Senate Finance Committee, trade staff, just a good person and someone that we certainly want to be in contact with going forward. I think the central issue for the administration will be what was talked about as an example in the Wall Street Journal article on NAFTA on the 10th of this month, and that is the relationship between the automobile companies and their supply chains with Canada, U.S. Manufacturing. I think that is just one example of how supply chains have been built around the NAFTA agreement, and how a disruption of those supply chains would have serious economic consequences. In Mexico, the Mexican president has said he's willing to discuss changes to modernize NAFTA. So I think the most optimistic look I can give to this is that what the waiting period does, in this 6-month waiting period does, is it provides a lot of negotiating leverage for the administration to see what changes Canada and Mexico are willing to make to accommodate some of the U.S. interests, the new president's interests are. And so it may not be enough. He may want to go further than they're willing to take it. And having the ability just to shut down the agreement may provide him some edge. I think he's well known as a negotiator, and I think this may be part of that inclination. I think there are a couple of opportunities that exist with the Trump administration as to what they had said during the campaign and what their inclinations are. Infrastructure revitalization was one that was talked about during the campaign, and involved, I think, bridges, roads, ports. And the good news for us is that a representative of one of our companies, a large logistics company within the association, has been appointed to head up the Trump administration's policies with respect to revising the infrastructure, and that person was announced early on. As a sidelight, last week on Wednesday and Tuesday and Wednesday, the administration announced that it was purging lobbyists from its transition efforts. So I don't know whether that person's still in the administration or not. It's not visible right now as to who's left and who is not. But I mentioned that as to maybe a setback in terms of our ability to influence the transition team on infrastructure revitalization. The second area, of course, is the regulatory environment. They're strongly opposed to a great number of the regulations that the Obama administration has put in place. And for brokers, for example, we see a strong regulatory inclination with respect to some of the PGAs that have gotten themselves into ACE and then suggested that they wanted to expand their level of information that would be demanded of importers I just use NOAA as one example, Fish and Wildlife as another example. These are burning examples just recently that have surfaced. But I think a lot of the PGAs have seen that the whole idea of an ITDS was a vehicle for gathering additional data, additional information, and over time, I'm certainly certain many of them would push the edges on what they can obtain through the ITDS system, expanding the level of data that would be required. So I think there'll be some pushback on that, and there has been pushback from NCBFAA on that score. So I think that's one area where we're in harmony. Other areas exist that I think are important. Exports. I think anything to do with exports has got to appeal to administration. I think U.S.-based jobs has been a hallmark of this President-elect's campaign, and so I think it's important outside the box on what would be useful from the point of view of exports. A miscellaneous tariff legislation. I think that is another opportunity for all of us right now. It'll result in legislation coming up at the end of the year, end of 2017. So let me just walk you through some of the elements of that. If you are in a position to represent your clients and get them interested in this, know that the clock is running and that the final deadline for applying for a petition for duty suspensions is running out. The deadline is December 12th. It's quite a process. You may not be able to get it done on time if it's complex, but if it's relatively simple, I think it's worth your taking a look at. Note that the next opportunity for such a duty suspension won't occur until October of 2019. Here are some of the rules of the road. You can't have a domestic producer of an article that's in competition with those that are being proposed. The estimated revenue loss to the U.S. can't be more than $500,000, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection will be administering this process. Here's a timeline for you. It tells you that in the fall of 2017, the Ways and Means Committee and then the Finance Committee will take up the package and presumably pass it by the end of the year. This is in law. It was part of the Customs bill that was passed last August, and it is a process that is underway now at the International Trade Commission. They have been rigorous in terms of providing information, public information on what to do and how to do it. I pose to you a couple of pitfalls, and I would tell you that I think looking for customs legislation now is not a smart idea, certainly not until we really get the lay of the land from a trade perspective. Customs is likely to be a place where protectionism and protectionist instincts on Capitol Hill will come into the fore. You saw in the Customs bill that passed in August that largely at the behest of House Democrats, there was legislation on forced labor. Actually, forced labor came out of the Senate, so I'll correct myself there. Senator Brown of Ohio was the person that got that done, but that legislation managed to convince Customs that the bridge had been crossed from facilitation to enforcement, And I think that was a predisposition that already existed at CBP, but now will be further fueled. And so it will be an interesting matchup between House Democrats and an administration, perhaps contrary to the interests and the efforts of the Speaker and of House Republicans, Senate Republicans, where you see that there's a matchup in an effort to use CBP as a tool for constricting importations of goods. I think this administration will also have a role in the regulatory efforts that are taking place at CBP. In conversation with CBP, I can tell you that they're really also in a quandary as to what will be asked of them. They had not, as early as last week, as late as last week, had conversations with the transition team. So I think all of this is a reason why I have not gone too far in speculating as to what might take place. GSP expires at the end of next year. I think GSP is a place where protectionist instincts will also surface. I think that legislation has got to be in doubt, renewal, but we've faced that many times in the past where renewal of GSP has gone on for 2 or 3 years, where we haven't been able to process GSP, and then retroactively the Congress comes along and passes it. Whether that's the case again this year, I don't know, but the review that's taking place now is likely to be very critical in the future of GSP. So that's my view. I can't say anything for sure, as I've told you before, but I have some instincts. I think this administration is for real. It's being formed. It is showing that it is following through in a great number of ways with its commitments during the campaign. I don't know which ones they may back off from, if they will. But I am also convinced, as I've just said, that they're serious. There's follow-up, and they'll have strong people in place to execute these policies. So now I'll turn to some questions. Although I think maybe we should interrupt right now to get Charles on board. Charles, why don't you talk a little bit about a legislative committee?
Okay, thanks, John. I think it's imperative for our association members to be able to start to think about how they can influence trade policy. The two camps within the Trump transition team, as John showed, there are those who have a zero-sum outlook on trade, where one person wins, another person loses, and then there are others who kind of view it that it's a win-win. Being from the industry, I kind of go by the Adam Smith model on the Wealth of Nations, written back in the late 1700s. This still applies today, that two countries can be better direct their resources to products that they are best producing. Kind of when we were at the GAC, I mean, if you look at it, I kind of view it, it's like baking pumpkin bread. You start with a little product, you get the materials, but then you add the yeast, and it expands. And that's the way that we need to be able to explain ourselves to not only to Congress, but also, I think, to the general public, is that by the bread growing, that everybody can benefit from good trade policy. So one of the ways that we can do that is by joining the NCBFA Legislative Committee. You can join by sending me an email. My email address is c.riley@steer.us.com. We have monthly phone calls. It looks like we probably have to wind up getting much more active in the future with possibly reaching out to members of Congress, besides just going to the NCBFA Government Affairs Conference that we have in September. That's the second one. By attending that, you can have a great influence by actually meeting with the representatives on the Hill. We have face-to-face with the representatives and senators and also their staffs. You carry a lot of weight. So I think we will be very active in the coming year, at least next year and possibly next 4 years with the Trump administration, if they go through some of these issues that they have been bringing up in the pre-election. So we also have that you can also work with local association. I know some local associations go to the Hill besides just the GAC in September. They also go in other times of the year, which is very beneficial. Also to follow social media, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube on trade issues. The Trump administration is very active on Twitter. You might want to look to other associations and the NCBFA that have Twitter accounts to follow along with it, because, again, there were a lot of misconceptions out there. One time I was watching on MSNBC, and Mr. Trump was on the show saying that, you know, he saw all these cars coming in Los Angeles off of a car carrier, and that all the cars would come in duty-free. Now, me being a broker, I know that was not true, that cars coming from Japan have a 2.5% duty rate, but for somebody out in Iowa, they do not know that. So I think we need to be very active, even with our social media, so that we get word out there, making the correct views on trade policy. So with that, I thank you for your time, and thank you.
Charles, let me just address a couple of the questions that existed that have been called in. Yeah, a lot of the questions that we see here drive down to a detail level that really we can't answer at this point, and I apologize for that. But we're trying to piece together information when they have not yet appointed a U.S. trade representative. They've not yet appointed a Secretary of Homeland Security, nor will they choose a commissioner for U.S. Customs. Really what the transition will do as a practical matter is fill the slots, select personnel, starting at the high level and driving it down to the low level over the next 6 months or longer. And policy will take place after a few of these people are in place. Transition team personnel will fill in around newly appointed candidate or designated office holders, such as the Department of Homeland Security. There'll be a coterie of transition people that will fill in around them. Those people at that point will generate policy and will drive this down to a detail level. So we can speculate what might happen, but we can't say anything whatsoever with certainty. I've heard from a couple of people they want to hear from Charles again. Charles, people are asking for your email address one more time, so why don't you give it again?
Okay. It is c.riley@steer.us.com.
And we'll also put that in the Monday morning briefing next week as well. We're going to do a write-up of this webinar, and that will be included if that helps everybody. You can also always contact anybody here at NCBFA headquarters, and we'll make sure that you're taken care of and pointed in the right direction.
And one additional question that came in that I think I can answer now is this transition process taking an inordinately long time to shake out? A good question. In some respects, I think there has been concern that it wasn't transparent. the process was moving slowly. But on the other hand, I think you have to recognize that this one has been unique insofar as the public attention that's been given to the President-elect's meetings with individual candidates for jobs. And I think it's helped. This President-elect has always liked to be on the front page of the newspaper. It helped him win. It'll help him create confidence in his new administration. And so I think to some extent they're bleeding this out a little bit and bringing in candidates that may or may not be for real. Ask yourself whether he can appoint Mitt Romney Secretary of State after the rancor that existed between the two during the campaign. But this president surprises people a lot, certainly surprised them with his victory, and so anything is possible. So I think that wraps it up from our point of view. Let me turn it back to Megan Montgomery.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Charles, both so much for giving us your time today. That concludes today's webinar. We will be sending a PDF copy of today's presentation later today, so if you don't have it, if you don't get it by the end of the day, let us know. We'll make sure that you get that. And thank you all for showing up on Thanksgiving week and listening and letting us help to educate you. And as always, let us know how we can help you keep trade moving.